we were talking about, what if there's no crisis, but there's just a long, slow problem, and that's the scenario you were about to describe for us.
Yeah, and so I think the way that we put in the paper was maybe helpful for people who want to crystallize the cost of running such high debt to GDP ratio. And let me just say from the outset that economists like to measure debt as a share of the economy rather than in trillions of dollars because it's relative to our ability to repay that debt. And so, $10 trillion, $30 trillion, it doesn't really tell you anything unless you know about the resources the country has to eventually make do on that debt. So we like to express it as debt to GDP. And we did this calculation in the paper where we said, what would average income be for Americans under a scenario where we stabilize the debt to GDP ratio over the next 30 years versus a scenario where debt rises along the lines of the way that CBO thinks it does. So in the baseline scenario, debt goes from around 100% of GDP up to around 166% of GDP over the next 30 years. So we're around 100% today. The Congressional Budget Office thinks over the next 30 years, it'll be around 166% of GDP. And we compare that to a scenario where we just stabilize the debt at 100% of GDP over the next 30 years. Well, in the scenario where debt grows fairly sharply, income per person is about $6,000 per year lower relative to the scenario where we stabilize the debt. And so, to me, that's the sort of think about that in terms of being the tax on the next generation for our inability to spend and raise revenues responsibly. And the average salary before that tax is around $129,000. The average income in 2054 is around $129,000. Now, whether or not you think a $6,000 tax on average on a $129,000 income is big or small is in the eye of the beholder. To me, that seems really large. That's a meaningful impact on standard of living. And others may see that that's small. Now, it is true in either case, the standard of living is going up. Americans will be richer one way or another, regardless of what we do about the debt. But they'll be $6,000 richer if we're able to stabilize the debt today. And the reason that they'll be so much poorer is largely because we're undertaking fewer investments in productive things. And so right now, the federal debt, I just said we don't want to measure it in trillions, but just to say it's $30 trillion. That's $30 trillion in investment, which is not going to education. It's not going to infrastructure. It's not going to investments in technology. And over time, that accumulates and means we'll be a poor country because of it. So, this baseline case where the debt slowly erodes our standard of living is not one to be, kind of casual about. It's meaningful in terms of the next generation.
Yeah, and it's kind of, I look at it as us spending their money, kind of
Yeah.
like saying, why don't we? They'll be better off anyway, so why not take a slice of what they've got now, and so we don't have to pay higher taxes or put up with less spending. It's kind of a generationally selfish point of view. I don't think people think of it that way, but
Yeah,
that's
generationally selfish can be, the title of a book that you and I write together. I mean, I think
okay.
it's the perfect phrase, Bob. And it is, it is disheartening.